Hey gamers, welcome to another episode of Bonus XP. Today we're going to talk about Fire Emblem Engage, and I have special guests ActualLizard and the great Mekkah back again. Guys, how are we doing today?
Hello.
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Mekkah, it has been a little bit of time since you were here, but I super appreciated when you did the full Fire Emblem series with me. It was a great episode with the three of you. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a long time, and I hardly remember it, but it was fun. I do remember that.
Today, I thought it'd be a really good time. I recently played through Engage for the first time. I know when you guys were all going through the throes of streaming it, I kind of avoided it just because I didn't want to see what was happening just so I could come in with a fresh experience. But I also did pay attention to the things that you all were saying about it, which was mostly good feedback, I think, which is great. I mean, I know some Fire Emblem titles have been a little hit or miss on their reception, but I feel like generally you guys enjoyed this game, right?
I had a good time playing it for the first time. I will say it's been a while since I've touched it for longer amounts of time, but my first impression was very positive. I think on like further viewing, investigations, exploration of everything it has, it does become a bit less exciting because the new wears off, the honeymoon is over, and now it's almost like the game is kind of not even there in most of the places I looked. Like most people just went back to playing older Fire Emblems when I talked to them. So I don't know where this game has gone honestly for most of it. Most of it, like I feel like it just kind of came and went. Whereas Three Houses, it had like massive staying power compared to Engage. I try not to bring Three Houses up every time we talk about Engage, but here I am bringing it up anyway.
I mean, I
That's what
get
I've
why you
noticed.
would compare them. You know, they're released on the same system. It's kind of like you would compare 6 through 8, or you would compare the 3DS titles to each other. So I think it makes sense to me why you would compare those.
Yeah, that was similar to my experience. I had a really good time in I would say my first three playthroughs. I had a really good time. And I do this with every Fire Emblem game. It comes out, I love it, I have my honeymoon phase, and then I play it like 6 or 7 times, and then I'm like, I don't like this anymore. And then I need to take a break and come back to it. So I'm in my little break right now before I go back for another couple playthroughs.
Can I ask, the first time that you guys played it, whether that was personally or you streamed it, what difficulty did you tackle it at?
Hard. I actually never finished Maddening ever.
Yeah, I also did hard for my first playthrough, and then the rest have been on maddening, except for one draft that we did on hard.
I'm pretty proud of myself too. I think this was the first time I like went into a Fire Emblem as a hard. And I'm definitely not as experienced as you guys. I think the years of replaying and the skill development and whatnot is probably a lot more in sync for you guys. But I made it through, and I think even though there were some maps that were really tough, like it was a really good time. And I think that's where I actually want to start the conversation. If you guys are just like the maps and how, again, pun intended, engaging a lot of them were.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed with the maps in this game. One thing that I really liked was, while I am kind of an engaged story hater, I thought the maps did a good job of implementing elements from the narrative into the gameplay. Like Chapter 11, I think, is the big example. That's the one where you lose all the rings.
Such a scary map.
But it's such a cool moment because of the way that it plays in with the story, right? The gameplay really makes you feel what's going on in the narrative. I wish it was Thracia Escape. That would have made it peak for
Oh
me.
God. Oh God.
You want
No.
to make it harder? Okay, all
Well,
right.
I think it would have been okay because it's like right after that you get a bunch of strong pre-promotes, right? So like whatever, if you have to leave someone behind, it's fine.
All right, best I can do is on Maddening, it changes to Thracia Escape. How about that?
All right, I could accept this.
All right. We made a truce. We did it. Yeah,
Mekkah, were there any that were stand out for you, or was that one that was the especially strong map?
that is the standout for me. I think if I were to describe Engage map design, it would be it's a little gimmicky, but in a way that feels a lot more fun than, for example, when people use that word to describe Fates, specifically Revelation. Like every map has something slightly special going on, oftentimes to introduce you to a new emblem mechanic or something, and it just kind of works. A lot of people compare it to like Fate's Conquest, which is usually lauded for its map design and just general gameplay vibe. I don't know if I would say that it does a very good job of tying in the story. I think Chapter 11 is definitely the best example of that, but I can't really think of any other great examples, but maybe I'm misremembering something. Generally, I thought the maps were fine to good, definitely enjoyable for a first playthrough. And again, really big step up to honestly a lot of previous entries. Fire Emblem, somewhere along the way, seems to have forgotten what it is like to make a good map, and I think Engage does a good job of providing, reasons to go fast. Not a whole lot in the map design themselves. Like usually they have reinforcements and like treasure chests and escaping thieves. I feel like there weren't a whole lot of those in Engage, but what it does do, and we'll probably come back to this as well with the Engage mechanic, it kind of encourages you to engage your units so that their timer starts on their engage meter, because you want to use engage to fight the tough enemies. And then suddenly it's like, oh, this unit is on a countdown on their engage mechanic, so I better make use of them as much as I can. And that encourages you to push further into the map, which kind of snowballs into an experience where there's a lot of uptime for your characters to do something, where you're not just moving units from point A to point B, which was my main concern with previous games that have boring maps.
I think in terms of maps for me, and just the variety of games I play, and I mean, you're talking about Fates as well. In Fates, a lot of the maps felt a lot more gimmicky. Like you had that one map where all of the enemies would level up or level down, depending on what room they were in. And to me, that just sounds very like nonsensical. Or like the weird elevator level. It's just so strange, and it's like, what's this way that we can incorporate this strangeness? Where I felt like Engage, when it had a gimmick, it at least fit the context of the world for the most part. I wouldn't say they were all like that. Like you have the beach level, and you have the tides rising and falling.
I hate that
and,
map.
See, and I agree with you, because like in a sense it is a gimmick for sure, but at least it's something that like realistically it makes sense, right? Like you're fighting on a beach, waves could go up and down, you could be separated from your other characters. It does slow the pace of the level. I know a lot of you veterans tend to enjoy the faster pace. I can crush this level in a few rounds, but at least when you had gimmick maps like that, it didn't like go into this crazy realm of like, what the fuck is actually happening here. Personally, I think my favorite map was and I think all the paralog maps were, well, I would say all of them. There were a couple that were the bane of my existence, but the Sacred Tome map, Violet's map, was a lot of fun for me, because it was a different approach on a task. So this time you were protecting several different targets and having to defeat the boss, as opposed to just defending a throne. It kind of reminds me of what you might see in a lot of other RPGs, or even something like a Heroes-ish game, where you're, like, you are protecting en masse a lot of different things. I'm sure that map is not for everyone, but I really enjoyed it because it made you think differently about how you were going to approach and what you were willing to sacrifice.
My favorite thing about that map is the first time I played it, I got totally jump scared when the priest warps the other priest.
Oh, yeah.
And then they warp another enemy forward, and I'm like, I didn't know you guys were allowed to do that.
Yeah. I know they warp like the bosses. I didn't know they could warp other priests. That's hilarious.
Yeah. The warper can warp the other warper.
Wow.
Who will then warp an enemy at you. Now, it doesn't end up mattering that much because the enemies aren't aggressive in that map, so they warp the enemy at you, and it's scary, but then they just go hit a rock.
I was going to bring that up. I feel like the Byleth paralog is like, it had some funny ideas, like the getting punished for warp is definitely something that should happen to every player. It's a very memorable experience because I remember that too, but it didn't really make me play differently. If anything, I feel like it makes you, it incentivizes you to play worse, because if I recall correctly, the enemies try to attack parts of the map, and then when they go down, you reward lessons. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so it is the Pinnacle Three Houses map where the story takes the first major pivot. So you're in that tome, and then each of the tomes has a crystal on them, and the enemies are their goal is to destroy all of the crystals. And I agree, it at first you don't necessarily know where the AI is gonna go, but then it's very clear if they can target a crystal, they're not targeting you.
Yeah, I feel like that one is very lenient because I remember they got to destroy most of everything that was in sight, and I still got the best reward for the map. So I think they should have
Oh,
done a little
really?
fine tuning. Yeah, I saw the same complaint from other people too. There's not too much of a reason to go out of your way to protect them because you can just finish the map before they get away. Which, I mean, that's in itself, that's a great Three Houses reference because in the original, you can also just kill the boss while they were all holding onto like the crest stones after stealing, and you just win anyway because they didn't get away. So you get them back, right? You still get the best reward.
I did think that was sort of a problem with Engage maps in general. They kind of got away with this, I think, through like clever use of like multiple bosses, reinforcements, and the multiple health bars. But I thought the side objectives were pretty weak in Engage. Like another example of this is in the Marth Paralogue, where you have the chest room on the left, and then the boss is like right to your right when you enter.
Yeah, he
And
comes
the
at you
first
too.
time you play, you go get the chests, right? So you go get the chests, you fight through all the enemies, and it's like a silver great axe, a speed tonic, and an elixir.
Yeah, at that point, there's no point. I think that obviously that's the final paralogue for the most part because it's the last ring you get back. And at that point, I was done with the game. Like I just wanted to be done, so I immediately went. And I think that was one of my shortest chapters. I think I finished it in 3 or 4
Yeah.
rounds.
Well, that's the thing is I think the map doesn't work on subsequent playthroughs
Right.
because once you know that the treasures don't matter, you're like, okay, I'm just going to go kill the boss then.
Yeah, I remember I had to actually stall the boss for a while because I didn't want to kill him before I got all the treasure, just because I wanted to, show what was in them at the very least for people watching. But
For the content.
it's almost like the map was making me do that. Like that was the point of the map, is to delay killing the boss, because I feel like he was so aggressive right away. Like within like 1 or 2 turns, he just started moving towards me. It's like, okay, I gotta hurry up and get all these chests out here. I gotta warp someone into the treasure room just to get there in time. Which I don't think that was the intention, but that made it at least funny to play for me. But definitely not a peak map. It is generally hard, I think, to make a late game map with compelling side objectives and treasure, because the reward has to be really good for you to go out of your way, not just be want to finish the game. Like whenever you're late in the Fire Emblem game, I really agree. You just want to be done with it, right? You just want to nothing. If I don't need it, I'm just gonna skip it. Generally speaking.
Yeah, I mean, it's like putting chests in the final map. Like, do I really care about these?
Yeah, I would like to harken back real quick to the point about that Engage didn't have a whole lot of good side objectives. I agree, and I think this was a really massive missed opportunity for them to give you rewards that would actually matter, which are the things that they end up giving you in the Somniel. They could have just given stuff from that currency to you, like just give me SP books or something as like a side objective in more maps, stuff like that. But that's what I really wanted in the game. It's more SP books, for example. Like, come on, why do you make me do mini games to get bond fragments if you just give me a treasure chest with like 10,000 of those? Like, that's something I'll go out of my way for. And that whole economy with the Somniel just messes up everything, I think.
I agree
Yeah.
with you too. I think the Somniel like completely weighs down the experience, and that's not. I think in Three Houses, when I know like a lot of people probably disagree with this, but I think it fitting the narrative of raising your team and being in a school, it fits. It's not this like strange building where you're doing these random tasks for a marginal benefit. But you're right. You can easily get new weapons from throwing things in the well, and some of them are pretty rare finds that you wouldn't find until late game. I think if you would have stripped down a lot of those things and made it maybe just cooking and fishing and maybe a few other things, you could allow better rewards in the rest of the game.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Three Houses has this problem too, where the stuff from the Somniel could have just been in interesting side objectives in the map. And I know part 1, the monastery, makes sense, but in part 2, they really bent over backwards to do it there. So I think Three Houses could have done with the same solution. They obviously just didn't want to.
Yeah, I assume that the hubs must just be really popular. Because, I mean, we've been
Yeah.
doing them for a while now, so they must just be really popular, which is interesting because I feel like people only talk about them online when they don't like them. I did think one of the things that I really thought could have been a side objective was the bond rings. Like, wouldn't it have been more fun to get Dire Thunder out of a chest than, like, having to roll on the gacha for it?
Did either of you see, I know I've talked about this several times on random podcasts now, but have either of you seen that video essay about Engage by, oh God, I forgot her name, but it's like 2 hours long.
Yes.
No.
And one of the points she brought up, she brings up that Engage might have been partially made in the way that it is to ease people into the gacha mechanics of Fire Emblem Heroes, because so much stuff in that game references Fire Emblem 3 Heroes. So maybe that was why they made it that way. But I do agree, it would have made much more sense to just give me bond rings and chests.
Let's talk about rings while we're here too, and maybe shift over to the engage rings, because obviously I think this is one of the biggest mechanics to the game. And I'm curious to hear overall how you feel about them and what they could mean for the rest of the series.
I like them. I think it's a neat way to let you do some really powerful things. In most cases without it being too broken. A couple of the rings are pretty broken. But like I get the idea, right? Where it's like, okay, we give you can have your 4-way dance, but only once or twice per map, right? It's like a neat way to balance giving you these really powerful tools. Like they give you warp in chapter 4, essentially. But only once, and it has some limitations because it's attached to a ring. So I kind of like that aspect of it.
Yeah, I think it was I agree. I was really skeptical before the game came out about those things. I thought they would absolutely break the maps, especially because we saw that old maps were returning in that game. We didn't know they were just the Divine Paralogs back then. So it was like, there's no way they can make maps ready for this. And honestly, at least for a first playthrough, I thought they did a pretty good job of balancing the ring effects with the actual maps, partially through the health stones that the bosses have, but also other means. Like, it's really impressive how they did that. Of course, the more you play the game, the more you're able to break them way further, and so a lot of people have posted like LTC clears of every chapter ever at this point. Sure, they can break the maps, but at least it took some effort. Whereas in Three Houses, I feel like every map or every post-time skip map just kind of begged to be warp skipped with an infinite use warp that you just got. So pretty big improvement overall. And like I said earlier, it's fun that they push you to engage by having strong enemies and just wanting to, use the mechanic. And then you're on a timer and you have to actually make the most of it, which is a pretty big part of strategizing and engage. Something that I myself struggle with. I want to hold off on engaging as far as I can, but the game is like, no, you actually want to engage quickly, because then you can run out your engage meter by the time you get to an engage pool and have the most uptime possible. And optimizing that is another entire layer to engage strategy that I really enjoy. So yeah, I love the mechanic. I have one qualm with it, if you don't mind me talking for a little more.
Yeah.
My one qualm with Engage and Engage rings specifically is that sometimes it feels a bit more like you're deploying your Engage rings and you're attaching characters to them, so that when I'm replaying the game, it's not like, oh, I'm going to, last time for this I used Goldberry, but now I'm going to use Rosado for this. It's more like, okay, last playthrough I used Ike to clear this part, and now I'm going to use Ike too, because this time he's attached to a different person. But I'm still going to use the Ragnell because it's the best weapon you can possibly ask for in this situation. So it kind of diminishes the differences between units, which is already a big problem, I think, in both Three Houses and Engage. So that's my one main drawback. But other than that, I do like the mechanic.
I do think that's a problem, Engage. I think it's like the rings and the super flexible reclassing system and the skill system that lets you kind of patch up any weakness a unit may have. So that I feel like when I think about how to beat maps in Engage, I'm not really thinking about what my units can do so much as I'm like, okay, for this map, you want a Vantage Wrath Warrior, which could be anyone, to go do this job. Yeah. Whereas in older games, I'm like, okay, there's 3 or 4 units that can hit this benchmark. So it has to be them. Whereas in this one, I'm like, okay, whoever my Vantage Wrath Warrior is going to do this.
So I'm curious to hear if you had a particularly favorite ring while we're on that topic too. I know starting out, just the baby FE player in me wanted to say oh, Lynn was my favorite, but when I really got to the nitty gritty and whatnot, I think I appreciated Corrin's ring the most because of the utility it provided, because no matter who you were using, being able to, create obstructions on the map, or draconic hexing, is that right? Yeah. Any of the more difficult enemies, just to weigh them down some, was always immediately useful. So my opinion completely changed on who I thought was probably my favorite, but I'm curious about you guys.
I honestly really like all the ones I've tried. I haven't messed around with the DLC ones too much, but I'm not gonna
I've heard
pretend
they
they're
completely break the experience. Well, I mean, like Engage Drinks breaks the experience, anyways. But like
yeah.
I've heard they even more so break the experience.
Yeah, they sure do. I honestly, it's hard to pick like really one favorite. I enjoy the complete unhingedness of Bonded Shield on Lucina. I think the only nerf they dare to apply to that is give it a very vague description that doesn't really match what it does. What it really should say is if you're not getting doubled, you're not going to die when you're next to this person. I really enjoy that one, almost more in the terms of theory crafting around it. I think the like little overrated characters from Engage, like 3 times with Septi, like one about Alfred, one about Alchrist and Etier, and one about Clan. And Bonded Shield is just so hilariously overpowered that it becomes fun to use. It probably gets a little boring once you got the hang of it, but just the way you manipulate the AI to attack your weaker character, which is the person that's being protected from 100% of damage they take, is so funny to me. That has to be my favorite, just because of how stupid it is. But it's not a very like distant first. There's a lot of them that I like.
I think my favorite in my first playthrough was the Byleth ring, because I feel like up to that point, in my first playthrough at least, I felt like it was like pretty tricky to one-turn a boss. And then I got the Byleth ring, and I was like, "Oh,
Not
I've
anymore.
unlocked unlimited power. I can take the bosses in one turn now."
Yeah, I think I really loved how I was really nervous about this, seeing the game prior to playing and getting the idea of what engaging might be, and how it felt like it might just be a damage spam for each one. Like, here's a cool little gimmick that they can play. But kind of like what you're saying, Mekkah, with Lucina, I love how much a lot of the characters reflected what they were known for, what they could do in their respective games. Not everyone, obviously, because they had to build some people up, or if you're talking about Sacred Stones with Erica and Ephraim.
Yeah, there's only so much you can do with
know.
like a bunch of rapier wielding lords, right?
Right. But I mean, like, in some capacity, Lucina with every time you have a high words are lost on me, not bond, support with someone, thank you, and like they could potentially block for you, and that coming into play for hers. I just thought, like, it's cool to see the different like elements from the more recent games popping back up and being like, no, this is literally what this character or these characters could do. It was kind of refreshing.
Yeah, that was a good way to celebrate the series for sure.
Last thing that we should touch on, I think this is one thing that also drastically changed the game, and that would totally be the boss health stones, and how the way you had approach bosses was completely different. And Lizard, this is kind of what you were talking about when we're talking about using Byleth, and like the planning is bosses were a lot harder in this game, and I want to know your thoughts on, like, is this another gimmick that you think that is here to stay? Did it make the experience, or did it kind of ruin it?
I think in terms of gimmicks from this game, I'm not expecting to see emblem rings in the next game, just because not that I would mind it, I just don't expect to see it again. It's like a big change for the series. Revival crystals, I hope, come back in the next 10 Fire Emblems. That makes the bosses feel like more than just slightly beefier enemies. In maps where you don't make Micaiah, it means that like warp skipping is not just a trivial thing you can do to beat the map. I love the health crystals, and the fact that they used multiple bosses in so many maps. I thought that made the game a lot more fun.
So I'm not gonna lie, I lost quite a few characters in this run, or my first run of the game, and it always happened the same way, where the boss would have some form of staff that they had to use, and because of that, it showed that they didn't move, and they would be on a throne. I'm like, oh, they're a throne boss. I know how to do this. And then once they finished whatever they were doing, then like 3 turns later, they could move, and I was like, fuck, and I lost the character every single time it happened. And I think a part of it too is you think, well, they have their health crystals, they're probably revival stones, they're not going to move from that throne, right? They're going to take every advantage that they can, and no, they don't.
Yeah, I think revival stones enabling bosses to move without necessarily just completely negating the difficulty of their map is such a power move for them, and it makes everything much more dangerous. My my arch enemy in this game is the chapter 5 boss, because it's how hectic that map is and because of how many enemies are with him. Like, they turned a boss fight into a real threat, and that's something I never thought I'd see in Fire Emblem after the first 15 games or whatever.
That's the retaking the castle map?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, it has like the big hallway on the left, and then he's an armor knight.
I feel like that might be the first chapter I lost someone. No, I didn't lose anyone. I watched Bopper do a chapter popping on him, and I think he lost someone on there. For me, it was Hortensia. I think it's chapter 10. Maybe it's later. That was
She's
the
in
first
10.
time. Yeah, that was
She's
the
also on the
first time
bridge.
that I lost someone because she just swooped in and slaughtered a character, and that was the first time I was like, oh god, they move.
I thought that this is one of the things I was impressed about with Engage. I touched on this a little earlier with like chapter 4 teaching you how to use warp. I think they did a really good job at like teaching you the mechanics through gameplay in like a safe environment, because the first time a boss moves is Lumera.
Oh yeah.
But Lumera, even with her Rider's Bane on Maddening, doesn't quite one-shot Vander. So it's like they teach you, they're like, hey, bosses are gonna move. And it's also in this map where, like, if someone does die, it's like 2 seconds, right? Because the map is very short. So I love that they teach you these things in kind of safe environments, and then you're like, okay, now I know that for the future, bosses are gonna move in this game.
Yeah, isn't that map also casual mode, or am I misremembering this?
Is that map casual mode? I'm not actually sure.
I don't know either.
It feels like it should be. Doesn't feel like Lumera should be killing anyone.
I mean, Engage generally, if you kill someone, they're not dead, but yeah.
Do you feel like all bosses should have revival stones? Do you feel like there could be something else to change it so it doesn't feel like, okay, I need to save up everything and just unload on this last guy? Because I noticed that was kind of my issue, where it almost felt like when I got to a boss, it was still the exact same approach, aside from that one chapter with 6 bosses, because now I might have a couple coming at me at once, and that's when I felt like, okay, it's a little fresh again. But it felt like it was getting a little stale when it's like, okay, yeah, you have 2 crystals, but like everybody for the most part can engage right now, so you dead, son.
I feel like it works best when you have multiple enemies nearby, and so you have to be careful about who's going to take what action anyway, because you don't have what it takes to kill a boss unless you plan it properly. My main example would be like the Marnie Mauvir chapter, where Mauvir has warp and he uses it against you. Like, there's so many enemies there that I still had to plan so much just to get the boss kill there, and even ended up having to like hold back for 1 turn in my first playthrough just because I couldn't kill them both. I think if it's just the bosses, like you said, then yeah, you're just going to hoard everything and then throw everything at them at once. And that's the same as like any old boss in the previous Fire Emblem game. They're just not a threat. It's the main threat is if they move and they have people near them. And as long as they keep that, I think the Revival Stones work. They could probably figure out something else as well. But yeah. I think the Revival Stones are a good thing that I wouldn't mind if they stayed around.
Yeah, I would love if they stuck around, and I know I've mentioned this a couple times, but multiple bosses. Engage does it so much, and I love it. I feel like it really complicates killing the boss when there's like 2 of them, because it's like, okay, maybe I have the firepower to kill Mauvir or Marnie, but usually I feel like you kind of have to plan if you're going to like kill them both in 1 turn, which makes it a little more interesting than like some previous games where it's like, okay, it's just 1 boss, you know? And even in this game, like in maps where there is 1 boss, I feel like it, even with the Revival Stones, it often doesn't end up playing that much differently than older games, because like you said, okay, we just walk everyone over, we all engage, and we get rid of all the health bars in 1 turn, you know?
Yeah, and like you said, if you can't kill someone, you sometimes still have the means to stop them from being a threat to you in enemy phase. Like Corn can stop them from moving, even if you can't kill them that turn. That was like a pretty big part of that clear for me.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, or like you can use Obstruct or Freeze. I feel like it encourages you to use more tools.
Agree.
My one qualm with this, and I mean, this obviously comes back to the story, talking about multiple bosses, is that you fought the same boss like 60 times in the game. And as long as we're seeing new people cycle in and not like, I beat you, but not really, you fell down dead, but not really, over and over and over again, that just got so old. And I couldn't, by the end, it was like, okay, I'm probably going to skip this part and just move on because it's just not, I'm probably going to fight him 4 more times, right?
Yeah, I think Fire Emblem just needs to accept that if you're not going to be able to build up 30 bosses for 30 chapters, it's okay to have minor generic bandit bosses and stuff in between. You can't have an epic showdown against the boss every single time, or like an epic story-wise showdown, you know what I mean? Like, because then you just end up reusing the same villains over and over, and no one wants that. So just have the generic bosses in between, and do it like Sacred Stones. Build up a couple villains over the course of the story, and then the couple times you fight them, or maybe hopefully the one time you fight them, you can make it really epic.
Yeah, I think the thing that really got me in Engage about fighting some of the bosses multiple times is that often the cutscene after you fight them is just like they just walk away.
Quite literally.
Like, why are we letting them walk away? But yeah, I agree. I don't mind the old games where they gave you generic bosses or like, you know, retainers of the big bad enemies. Or sometimes they would do the thing, I just brought up Sacred Stones, like there's, I think it's chapter 10 in Ephraim Route where like Selena is the boss, but then she leaves.
Yeah.
So like there are ways you can have the bad guys show up in maps and be around later, and you just don't kill them. And I think that's like preferable to what we get in Engage, where you fight the same boss like 3 or 4 times.
All right, guys, any last things before we wrap up our discussion? Any final thoughts on Fire Emblem Engage?
It was good. I think there's a lot of mechanics that I hope they borrow. I think like the map design was the best it's been in a while. I want the revival crystals to return. Even I'm not expecting the rings to return because that feels like an Engage thing, but they're really cool. I liked those a lot too.
Yeah, I really enjoyed playing Engage for the first time, and I thought the general consensus tends to be gameplay good, story bad. I do think the gameplay could have been elevated by the story and everything around it, like with the things that we just discussed about the escaping villains and everything. So
sure,
I would really appreciate, you know, a good story for next Fire Emblem to accompany good gameplay, but at least they got this half right, so that's cool.
And Mekkah, would you have felt better if there had been a Vake Engage ring?
I forgot if he's a bond ring or not, but all I care about is that all the stats that it gives are like 1 higher than Robin's bond ring.
Would it have been better than the Krabben ring though?
That's a good question. I mean, they actually did make an Engage ring out of that. I don't know. It's maybe we can just say that Vake doesn't need an Engage ring to be better than Robin.
All right, you heard it here first. Vake does not need one. But I think that this wraps up our discussion on Fire Emblem Engage. Mekkah, Lizard, I want to thank you again for being here. Mekkah, where can our people find you? What are you currently doing right now?
I'm on, if you find Mekkah Fire Emblem on YouTube, I'm right there. I forgot how many Ks my current URL has. So
Wait, you're not Elon Musk? Is that right?
That's true. I am contrary to popular belief, I am not Elon Musk. I do not sell Tesla stonks anymore, unfortunately. We ended up rebranding to Mekkah, which everyone agrees with was a great idea. And now I'm going to remove the blocking feature from YouTube too. I'm currently proving that Vake is better than Robin by streaming Awakening and not using Robin at all. It's going very swimmingly. I am playing Fire Emblem 8 Sacred Stones on Lunatic mode, which has been a horrid disaster in terms of how long it takes, but it has been very fun. And I'm playing FE4, where all the mounted units have bad move and all the not-mounted units have good move, which has also been a really fun mix-up. So lots of stuff to check out.
And Lizard, what are you doing on your channel right now?
Yeah, so right now, I know, funnily enough, Mekkah, you just posted a video about finishing this. We drafted every Fire Emblem game, and I'm currently working my way through the 3 houses portion of that draft. And then also streaming my first playthrough of The Last Promise, which is kind of like the granddaddy of FE ROM hacks, I feel like. So those are like the 2 projects, and then I have like Fire Emblem video essays coming out every week.
Fun, and they're really good too. I think when you and I met, we talked a little bit about them, how they're like just a really good take on how to use items or why you should use this character or why you should think more about if you should use this character. I really do appreciate those.
Oh, thanks for saying that.
Well, that wraps up our discussion. I want to thank all of our patron supporters for making this possible. We really appreciate your love and support. If you like hearing our episodes, make sure you sound off on our Discord. We will definitely keep it up at Hey RPGaymer. Look for the future for more Fire Emblem content. We're going to try and tackle as much of the series as possible. We want to thank you for listening. Now go out there and get gaming.